Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We're joined by an illustrious group of speakers today at the European Citizen Science Association policy discussion. We have speakers from the United States, so I think it's good morning to you. And obviously, many people from Europe are taking part in this debate. We also have a speaker from Australia. So we're looking at policy from right across the world. Citizen science policy is very exciting, and one of the key aims of this workshop is to launch the new revitalized European Citizen Science Association policy group. So very welcome to you all. I'm just going to make the introductions, and then we have an illustrious group of speakers who we're going to introduce you to. If you don't mind, and just bear with me, I'm going to try and share my screen with you and show you the program. So hopefully we can see this. Sorry, it just takes a little bit of a minute to do this. Share screen and click and share. Yes, I'd love to be with you today I'd love if we were all together in one location, but unfortunately that's not possible. So this is basically the format of the workshop here today, and we want a lot of participation and questions. Please write your questions and your suggestions all the way along the line, right throughout the show. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the various different panelists to answer those questions. So panel one is comprised of Sven Schade he's giving a European perspective. He's from the European Commission. Lea Shanley is from the United States of America, and she's going to be discussing Citizen Science Association law and policy, the US policy priorities overview as well. Unfortunately, we can't be joined by Erin Roger, but we have a very able stand-in, Alison, who's from the Australian Citizen Science Association, and she's going to give us the Australian policy priorities overview. Now, once those talks are complete, we're going to go to you. We're going to take your questions and answers, and we're going to discuss those. And we want, obviously, a particular focus on policy. So the second panel, we're delighted to be joined by Martin Brocklehurst from the UK, and he's going to talk about the UNEP Global Partnership. Muki Haklay, who many of you will know, he will be talking to us about the Arhus Convention, and he'll also be mentioning the DITOS project, which he was very much involved with. We're delighted again from the Commission to be joined by, I'm afraid by video on this occasion, by Berti Suman. I can't spell Berti, so apologies for that, but nevertheless, we'll have a video by Anna. If that failing the video working, we have a backup plan for that. Then again, questions and answers, and it's very, very important that we get all your questions and answers. Just to draw your attention, there is a feedback form. It's this https bit.ly 33EMWMA. Now, I think that's available on the website. And just to say that I'll be doing a very short wrap up at the end and next steps, but we are very much looking for you to join us in future in the European Citizen Science policy group. And we hope that the speakers today will inspire you to do that, to actually get involved, so we can really push on developing good policies and helping citizen science to participate in existing policies as well. So Sven is going to give us a good overview of exactly what's possible in that regard. So at the end of the session, we've agreed to move to the breakout room if there is further discussion to be had. And in that case, obviously, we'll be able to have a proper discussion. We'll be able to discuss things one-to-one with everybody. So unfortunately, because of the platform, we can't all have a big discussion amongst ourselves as we would if we were together in a room. But nevertheless, we'll do what we can. So just to give you quickly the objectives of the workshop, and then we'll move to our first speaker. So we're doing this immediately. We're launching a revitalized European Citizen Science Association policy group. Very much looking forward to that. We're looking to establish an online citizen science policy network using social media. Now, there is already discussion on that in the feedback form. So if any of you would like to go into the feedback form, you're welcome to write what you like in the feedback form. It's basically a blank canvas to allow you to write and discuss things. So we have a number of different potential platforms, and we really want to get recommendations at this stage, but we will be developing a social media platform for discussion on policy. We wanted to discuss and identify the key policy priorities for ECSA for the coming 2 years. Now, that also applies to the other associations as well. We're going to work closely with the United States and Australia and any other citizen science associations around the world that we can in a reasonable form. But it's wonderful to have top quality speakers here today to talk to you about their policy priorities. However, what we want to end up with from this workshop, the key thing we want to end up with is a list of your priorities, because policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. After you've listened to the speakers today, please do write down what your policy priorities actually are. So I'm going to stop sharing this now at that stage, and I'm going to pass you over to our first speaker. So apologies if you're seeing my screen again. I'm going to try and navigate back to the portal. Oops, stop sharing. Right. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Sven Schade.
Thank you very much, Neil. Brilliant. I did share my slides already, so I hope they will come up anytime soon. So thanks a lot for having me. Thanks also for organizing this session, which I think will be stimulating a very exciting discussion. As Neil said before, I'm working for the European Commission for the Joint Research Center, and I'm going to present a perspective on citizen science from a European perspective. So I hope you see my slides. If not, Neil, let me know. So basically, let me just...
They're here now, yes.
Yeah, all right, brilliant. So I want to start with part of the perspective, and this is actually taking the viewpoint to see how citizen science can connect to different thematic policies. So here, basically, in the diagram, you see how different activities in which citizen scientists may be involved, like data gathering, data validation, and data analysis, can actually then be connected to policy-making processes. Then after the decisions have been taken, those have to be communicated, of course. And after any political decision, we basically want to monitor the impact of that decision, where again, we have to gather data. So I could give you many examples, for example, linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, which have also been an important topic throughout the conference. I just want to mention two very prominent examples here. One is actually a long-standing activity on the bird index in Europe. So there actually volunteers contribute by bird watching to provide information about biodiversity all across the EU. And more recently, more and more citizen science activities also connect to pollinators and the decline of pollinators in the EU. And again, citizen science is a very, very important source of information. So here you basically see this connection of citizen science into thematic policies. And here I really want to highlight that only about a month ago, we published an official Commission document that actually gives recommendations and best practices how citizen science can be connected to environmental monitoring. So this may be indeed biodiversity and pollinators, but it could also be air quality, water quality, and a lot of other things. And in this document, you find our recommendations after intense work and consultations over the past 4 years. We are very happy that this has been now published. And it also includes a whole set of examples how citizen science can help policy. Then we also have a second perspective on citizen science, and this is actually policy that is supporting citizen science. I don't want to speak too much about research policy here, also because my colleague Lyndon Farright yesterday introduced in much detail the Science with and for Society program and the missions of Horizon Europe. So this is research funding related to the open science agenda. And also their policy is made to help citizen science to flourish. This also happens in relation to environmental and Earth observation, by the way. And then there is actually another set of policies that can also support citizen science, and this is better regulation. So this is the improvement of public services, which speaks a lot to transparency and people participation in decision making. So also here, in addition to using citizen science for policy, the other important perspective is look into policies that is supporting citizen science to flourish. You can read more about this very soon because there is also a citizen science cost action, which is now about to end and which will publish its final book. And in there, you will also find a chapter on policy and citizen science, which was part of the work we did in a working group on the science policy society interface. So to come to an end with this bird's eye overview, I want to quickly say a few words about the new framing that we are facing now, which is actually very favorable of citizen science. So the new commission actually with President von der Leyen came into place in December last year, and they proposed actually 6 big priorities for the European Union. And 3 of these 6 priorities are very favorable and provide very good grounds to help citizen science. The first one is the European Green Deal, which emphasizes a lot that more has to be done to engage citizen science in relation to environment and sustainability. Amongst others, it includes a new biodiversity strategy, which explicitly asks for citizen science to contribute. We also see a second political priority, which is called Europe Fit for the Digital Age, which is all about digital transformation and the changes in society. And as we saw yesterday in the keynote or in the artificial intelligence session today, exactly the use of technologies to help people carrying out citizen science is a big issue and a big topic, which very well fits to this political context. And last but not least, the third priority is a push for European democracy, so increasing democratic processes. And also here, it opens up an entire field for citizen science to find its role in new governance structures and also to feed into this priority. So with this, I want to finish. I hope I could give you an overview about the current landscape of citizen science and policy in Europe, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Sven. Excellent talk. And what's the most excellent about it is you've actually finished it on time and in fact a little bit early. Hopefully our other speakers will follow suit. Just to reiterate, before we go on to our next speaker, who is Leah Shanley from the United States, I want to make sure that people know that the feedback form, please do leave your name and your email if you're interested in joining up with the ECSA policy group. And also, we do want your questions. Any questions that you have for any of the speakers, please write them down. And please also contribute by putting your policy priorities, your own interests in terms of policy priorities into the text boxes available. And what we'll do is we'll put them to the speakers later. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker from the United States. We're very honored to have Lea Shanley with us. And Leah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Neil. I've shared my slides, so hopefully it'll show up in a moment.
There you are. You've got it. Yeah, that's it.
Is that good?
That's very good.
Okay, great. So before getting started, I'd like to thank ECSA for giving us this opportunity to highlight citizen science policy efforts around the globe. When we think about policy, we typically think of public policy, a system of laws, regulations, government actions, and funding priorities established by government to address social or economic issues. This also would include policymakers and their staff who make the laws, government agencies charged with implementing them, and the regulators and the courts that must enforce them. But policy may also include, at the local level, the rules and procedures established by citizen science projects to guide the collection, distribution, publication, and use of data and results. Over the past 2 decades, I've worked on citizen science and policy issues at a variety of scales, including conducting participatory action research with local communities to inform natural resource management. As a former science advisor in the US Congress and former White House Innovation Fellow, working to provide the impetus for laws and policies to support citizen science at the national level. And today I'm inspired by my colleagues on this panel, like Sven and Martin, who are offering us a big vision for citizen science and global policy impact. Over the years, I've found that participatory mapping projects often have a social or policy objective, whereas citizen science projects seem to have a difficult time articulating or tracking their policy challenges or impacts. Indeed, several studies have suggested that the potential value of citizen science for informing policy has yet to be fully realized. So there's an opportunity here to understand the current and potential role of citizen science at all levels of government and in governance more broadly. My colleagues Sven, Aletta, Alison, and I proposed and edited a special issue of the Citizen Science Journal, and hopefully the link will be displayed. The articles in this special issue frame challenges and opportunities for citizen science and policy development, and provide relevant case studies at the local, regional, national, and international context. So I encourage you to check it out. Within the United States, efforts have addressed local, state, and national policy issues. For example, at the national issue, we focused on developing policy to support citizen science. We built citizenscience.gov, which includes a toolkit, projects catalog, and a community of practice that now engages more than 400 employees of the federal government across 60 federal agencies. We wrote the White House Memorandum on Citizen Science, which I might add, we incorporated some of the ideas from ECSA's 10 policy principles of citizen science to encourage the ethical and meaningful use of citizen science by the government. We provided the impetus for national legislation to clarify the authority of government agencies to use citizen science, which, if you could believe it or not, was in question over the objections of some federal lawyers. This growing support for citizen science by government policymakers in the US is a direct result of the focused grassroots efforts of government agency staff themselves. It was not a White House mandate, but an upswell of government employees who are interested in using citizen science to the greater good. They worked in partnership with the US Citizen Science Association and organizations such as SciStarter, as well as our strategic positioning of citizen science as a method for addressing government agency missions and national priorities. At the same time, non-governmental groups like the Public Lab and IC Change and many others have been working with local communities and state governments to address environmental policy and justice issues related to air quality, water quality, and much more. This brings me to our US Citizen Science Association's Law and Policy Working Group. Our group over the past year has been exploring policy for citizen science and citizen science for public policy through a series of 7 webinars and monthly working group discussions. We're addressing such questions as, how can law and policy support citizen science, either through opening opportunities or mitigating barriers, things like privacy, copyright, and a big issue that's becoming in the US is freedom of speech or the right to collect data or environmental data. How can we make citizen science data more trustworthy and actionable for the management decisions and public decision making? How do we measure our policy impact? Through collaborations with the Harvard Law School, we're working to develop model legislation targeted at state legislatures, as well as an Ask a Legal Question portal for citizen science projects. We've co-organized a series of informal discussions with colleagues from government agencies in the US, Canada, Australia, and Europe to share lessons learned and strategies for government-wide support of citizen science. And our working group has begun to identify a set of potential activities for 2021, including developing a repository of policy documents and case studies. We reached out to Niall and Sven on the ECSA Policy Committee to propose building a global network of interested citizen science researchers and practitioners focused on policy issues. And so we're really delighted today to be here in identifying policy priorities in areas of common interest between our organizations, the CSA, ECSA, and ACSA. In conclusion, I want to offer a bit of caution. Having policy relevance doesn't necessarily mean having an impact on policy or public sector decision-making. Sharing citizen science data with policymakers does not necessarily mean they will use that information or use it wisely, as we're learning here in the US. Policymakers and their staff do not have time to search out and read the academic literature. And as per a peer literature review of the last 20 years of participatory mapping in the ERISA journal, more and better information does not necessarily lead to better decisions. This is because citizen science, like science generally, is but one factor in policymaking. We like to say in DC, there are 3 factors at play in policy decision-making: policy, politics, and procedure. In order to have an impact on policy, we must not only work from the bottom up, but also from the top down, connecting these 2 worlds so that decision makers are ready to receive and act on the information provided by citizen scientists, and so that decision makers provide financial support needed for citizen science projects. Citizen science has the potential to play an important role in public policy, just as law and policy should play an important role in the design and practice of citizen science. But we must create those linkages from the beginning. We must build new partnerships between government and the public it serves. Our goal here is to make citizen science more trustworthy and actionable for science and decision making. Our challenge, however, is to find solutions that overcome the policy barriers and improve processes that support and enable open science and innovation. We also must seek to evaluate and recommend approaches that will increase the impact of citizen science on public sector policies and practices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Leah. So we've now had speakers from Europe and we've had speaker from the United States. And now it's our great honor to introduce Alice Motion, who is speaking on behalf of the Australian Citizen Science Association. So Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which I join you from today. That's the Gadigal and Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's my pleasure to share some of Australian citizen science policy priorities with all of you this evening or this afternoon. We are seeing, even in the first sort of 4 or 5 years of ACSA's existence, although I acknowledge what Leah pointed out, that we aren't yet seeing citizen science reach its full potential in terms of informing policy. There are pleasingly increasing examples of where citizen science is helping to set strategic direction more broadly. And I'd like to present a few examples of where citizen science is intersecting with policy in Australia. So first of all, I'll start off with the strategy for nature. So this is the overarching framework for all national, state and territory legislation, policies or actions that are concerned with nature in Australia. And ACSA was part of the team who advocated for increasing citizen science role in this strategy and extending citizen science beyond the important, but not beyond the important role of observations of nature, but extending that into other meaningful contributions by citizen scientists. Another example is the State of the Environment reports, where ACSA has acted as is acting as a reviewer for some of these reports. These are reports that are put together by independent experts and who provide a national assessment on the state of environment and advise where we're doing well and where we're not doing so well, and influence policy in this regard. There are many examples of how the Australian Citizen Science Association and citizen science more broadly is starting to influence government policy too. As we look to the horrific fires that are happening in California at the moment, we're acutely aware in Australia of the impact of these bushfires, and this past summer was one of the most horrendous bushfire seasons that we've seen in Australia. And as people have started to recover from the horror of this bushfire season, with over 18.6 million hectares of forest destroyed and at least 34 deaths and over 1 billion animals killed in this event. What we have started to see is this horror has, if we start to recover from this horror, we've started to see some change in the way that people are coming together to think about how to address some of these issues, such as bushfires, and how to deal with these really important priorities for the continent. It's also been very interesting to see that, of course, in Australia on this continent, the traditional owners, Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been managing bushfires for tens of thousands of years, and we're seeing a return to the respect and consideration of Indigenous land management practices from the first scientists and indeed the first citizen scientists in the world. We've also informed policy such as the Office of Environment and Heritage citizen science strategy, and increasingly government departments are reaching out to ACSA and to citizen scientists to include this as part of their policy. ACSA have also worked to influence or to add to or to contribute to state strategies in citizen science, such as the Queensland Citizen Science Strategy, which really aimed to help people to find citizen science projects, to highlight the importance of citizen science in raising awareness of science, and also to grow a community in this area. And the final example that I'll share today is contributions from the citizen science community and previous members of ACSA Management Committee to papers such as this one from the Chief Scientist's Office that have celebrated citizen science within the country and pondered the important question of how to increase engagement within the community and to develop citizen science practices. So these are just some of the examples. I hope that I've managed to share some today for us to think about how citizen science in Australia is beginning to have more of an impact on how we set some of the strategic direction in this country. And just before I finish and hand back over, I'd like to really warmly invite you on behalf of ACSA. Thank you to ECSA for having us to our online citizen science conference that will be taking place in October. Every Wednesday in October. You can find out more on our website. We have a fun-packed and very interesting programme, and we'd love to see many of you there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alice. That was absolutely wonderful, and I noticed from the comments that you've got quite a few fans there. So great. And before we go into our questions and answer session, what I'd like to do is just share my screen briefly to encourage people again that there is a feedback form. I notice some of you are using it, and I'd like to encourage all of you to use it. So I'll just show you. I hope you can see that there. That's the feedback form. Now we've cut it down a little bit. So if you could just take a note of that, it is actually recorded in various different places. But please, what this is for you. It's effectively a blank canvas. Please don't abuse it. But I mean, you can write what you like in it. We're looking at our various different objectives. One of the key things is we want you to tell us what your policy priorities are for the forthcoming 2 years. So, I mean, if you can do that, but we also are looking for people to join up with us and join our network. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have to do a lot of work. It may mean that you can just contribute or contribute online, but we certainly do want people to engage and get involved. So please do contribute and do leave us your name and email address specifically. I can see that we've got a good audience, and I'm delighted with that. So without further ado, I'd like to stop sharing my screen if I can. And I'd like to invite our panelists back into the fray so we can get going on the questions and answer sessions. Is that okay? Okay, I can't see the panelists. I'm not sure if anybody else can. Do we have, I'm looking specifically for the panelists from panel 1. So I'm hoping our technicians can do that. Okay. No sign of any panelists. Okay, so I'll continue on. What I'm not sure exactly what's happening in terms of the panelists. Can anybody speak to me? No. Okay, I'll just in advance read out some of the questions and the comments that people have actually made. One comment is, which I very much like, from Dorina. She's saying, "Well done, everyone. You're amazing." So that's kind of a positive comment. So I hope that's going to continue to be the focus of things. Then there is a comment in relation to Alice, and it's particularly saying, "Great land acknowledgement, Alice." So again, that's a very nice comment. And we have a number of questions from different people, but we need some panelists to answer them. I'm not going to answer them all. So we have them now. Sven, can you hear me okay? And you're muted, I think.
Yes, I hear you very well. Thanks, Neil.
Good. Alice, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. And how about you, Leah?
I can, and if I might start, I have a question for Alice.
Oh, please.
Alice, how has the Australian Citizen Science Association worked closely with the Indigenous communities in Australia? It's something we are beginning to think about how to do here in the US.
I'd say, Leah, that really we're at the beginning of that journey too here in Australia, and we're always trying to seek collaboration and partnership with Indigenous people, Indigenous scientists, Indigenous members of the community. And there are some fabulous examples of Indigenous-led citizen science projects here in Australia, including one that just escapes my mind, but won the Eureka Prize last year. Maybe somebody will help me out in the chat, or I'll Google it now. But Leah, we're something that we are striving to improve and to embrace at ACSA.
Yeah, if I could just put in there, Alice, because I actually was at another session, and it was quite wonderful. There was one of the speakers was talking about using citizen science to help save a particular type of possum in Australia, and I thought that was a lovely story. So I don't know if she's listening in this session, but I actually got a copy of the possum. You know, I mean, obviously you've had some horrific fires in Australia, and I mean, citizen science obviously has played a key role in highlighting many of the issues in relation to those. So that's a great thing. Can I move to Sven actually, because we have an interesting couple of questions for Sven from Raman. He's asking Sven, down the road, when and how do you see the citizens who might be experts in certain domains or directly affected by policies can get more involved in step 4, the process of policy decision making? So how do you see people getting more directly involved in, in actual policy making from a citizen science perspective?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Ramin, and thanks, Neil, for repeating the question. So this is really about this connecting to policy and political decision making, which is a very big question, and it's difficult to answer in a short time available. But of course, we saw this option to contribute indirectly by providing scientific knowledge. I think this is very, very clear. For more direct contributions, I think it's also important to say that these 6 steps, this schema that I showed before, actually can apply on all sorts of administrative levels. So this could apply on the European level, but also on national level or at city level. So I think it's important to recognize this, because engagements in political decision making may then really depend on the exact scale where we are. So to a certain degree, it's certainly easier to engage in local decision making, for example, with the city council. But we all see more and more good examples of engaging citizens in policy making also at national levels. We're leaving a bit the notion of pure citizen science. There is much more citizen engagement and participatory policy making. But one of the impressive examples is actually from Ireland. And there are the so-called citizens' assemblies, which are really an impressive way of engage people in decision making. For example, there was a law on abortion to be discussed, and what they did actually, they invited a representative subset of about 100 people from all kinds of backgrounds to meet with each other over weeks, every weekend. And I heard it was a setup like in a big wedding. So it was a huge room with round tables where people were deliberating on policy options and giving in their input to the decision-making process. So that's my initial reaction. I think with this, we are also expanding from citizen science to wider other forms of citizen engagement, which I think is something we should also have in mind. And there are these very interesting examples emerging in many countries, actually. So I hope this answers for the time being.
Okay, I'm very glad that you were that you thought so highly of the Irish Citizens Assembly, because it was actually taking ordinary citizens and putting them together, and it was quite extraordinary how the outcome came. Actually, it was a representative sample of citizens, but they were picked at random from the register of electors, or many of them were anyway. And you know, it did come up with some fantastic policies. It's not just that particular one. There was literally a whole host of different constitutional inputs and so on that came from that. Just shows the power of citizens. Now I have a question for Leah here, and it's basically as follows: where do you see the common policy priorities between ECSA, US CSA and ACSA, and what specific actions should the ECSA, US CSA and ACSA, sorry about all the initials, policy committees take to collaboratively address these priorities?
Well, that's a fantastic question, but I actually would turn that around to all the folks who are participating in this session. We're here to listen today, although there are two areas we've immediately identified. One is the privacy issues, data privacy, with Europe instituting the GDPR and the US trying to catch up. I think that's an important area of common interest. The second one is the freedom to collect environmental data. Here in the US, we call that freedom of speech, or one of the elements of freedom of speech. Muki's going to talk about this under the Arhus Convention shortly. But I think today we're really here to listen to you all on what you'd like to see us work on.
Okay. I'd like to finally give a question to Sven, which is, given the very wide context, how do you see the role of the ECSA Policy Working Group? That's specifically about the working group, and which kind of activities would you consider useful?
Yeah, okay, to a degree, I have to echo what Leah just said, because I do think that indeed it's up to the community to identify what they would really consider most important. So it should be a working group for the community in itself. But of course, from the talk I gave earlier, I would really like to see different tasks addressing these different policy priorities. So really see and researching more and contributing to the Green Deal in Europe. So really bringing the policy voice also via ECSA to the European scene. So, for example, taking up some of the recommendations from the staff working document I referred to. When it more comes to the digital age, I think they are also looking into the use of AI and the notion of data spaces. There is an enormous potential to work also more deeply into that. And thirdly, I think this whole discussion on citizen science and democracy, it does pop up here and there, and there are spaces where this is discussed, but it might be leveraged more on the ECSA level. But these are just my viewpoints, what I would like to see. But of course, the other members of the working group have to speak for themselves.
Okay, thank you very much, Sven. Just before we go back to our next panel, do any of you have any particular final words in relation to this, or want to contribute to any of the points that you've seen in the texts that have been coming in? And I would encourage, please, people who are watching this to put in questions or to put in any comments that they have, and particularly in relation to you know, what are the actual policy priorities that you'd like to address. And when we're talking about actual policy priorities, we're talking about anything from things like the Water Framework Directive to very localized policy priorities, but anything that can be affected by policy in a European context. So any final words from our panelists here, and we'll invite you in again at the end. Are we happy to move on? Yeah, okay. Okay, so without further ado, then we're going to move on to our next panel. And I think we have to just let Martin Brocklehurst will be the next speaker from the UNEP Global Partnership. And I'd like to remain in the conversation here myself as chair and just invite Martin to speak for 8 minutes on his specific presentation. So Martin, are you with me? You are?
I am, yes.
Yes, well, I'm going to hand the floor straight over to yourself.
Hopefully my slides will be coming up.
Okay. Hopefully. Yes, do you want to just quickly, while your slides are coming up, Martin, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and say a couple of words about who you are?
Yeah, okay. I'm one of the founding members of the European Citizen Science Association and also one of the founding members of the Citizen Science Global Partnership. And if I can get my slides to work, then we can start my presentation. So I'm not quite sure what's happening here.
Can you share them yourself? Do you have them on your own PC?
Let me try. They're on my PC, and I'm going to press share screen, and share. It says sharing my screen. Can you see the slide yet?
I can't. Sorry about the technical issues to everybody. I think they're coming up, Martin. There's your screen. So now you're just going to need to actually run the slideshow and then move to the particular tab, which is your screen.
Can you now see them?
They're coming again. I can see them, but I think you need to actually run the PowerPoint presentation now and move to that window. Yes, I think we've got you now. Australia, November 19, 2019. Yes, off you go.
Okay. Let me start. That's right. Let me start my presentation by reminding everybody that we are at a critical time for humanity on the planet. Climate change is real and accelerating. Biodiversity decline is rapid and shows no signs of diminishing. Resource use is spiraling out of control. Poor air quality contributes to killing millions every year. And we've now added to this list with a global pandemic that has illustrated just how interconnected our world now is. I want to inspire you today that citizen science can make a difference and help solve these problems, but only if you're prepared to get involved in citizen science and policy, because this is the way that you can make a difference in dealing with these global issues. This is the way that you can secure a future for your children, and we can solve these problems. 2 slides from Australia illustrate for me why citizen science and policy are crucial to humanity's future. In 2001, I attended an inspirational meeting of the UN Science Policy Business Forum in Canberra, Australia, where citizen science was given a central platform with some of our biggest global companies, leading experts on remote sensing, and with global leaders from the UN. Listening to key scientists at the forum talking about the growing level of greenhouse gases in 2018, I was struck by the view that science is not enough to convince our policymakers that rapid change was needed. At that time, the Australian bushfires were just starting, and as I flew home, I went over the Murray-Darling Basin for hours, and the consequences of climate change were rammed home. For below me, Australia was experiencing its largest ever spring fires, the highest ever temperatures recorded, and a drought worse than the millennium drought of 1996 to 2010, itself one of the worst droughts in over 100 years. I could see no water for hours. Communities were running out of drinking water. Rivers that carried cargo vessels were drying up, and the country was choking on smoke. And as I left, it got worse, as you all know. And 2 comments were made at that time that drove home to me why citizen science at scale is important to dealing with these issues. Firstly, there was Dr. Tom Beer, a pioneering 1980s researcher into bushfires and climate change, who said, "I suppose I was young enough to believe that doing the science was going to be enough, and miraculously people would act on it that was a naive view, but I think that was fairly common amongst working scientists at the time. And another quote at the same time from public sector officials to officials attending the ADAPT New South Wales conference. Public Affairs issued advice not to discuss the link between climate change and bushfires. And therefore you get the comment on the bottom right-hand side of this particular slide. If I needed more inspiration, that we needed more than scientific evidence to drive rapid policy change, this was it. It strengthened my belief that science is not enough. We need citizen science, and we need citizen science at scale to drive rapid policy change and to overcome entrenched economic interests that continue to deny reality as fake news. Then yesterday in this conference, in Conversations, I heard the same message from Nuria Castell in discussing her work on air quality. And she said, I thought I was contributing to society, but I was just doing my research, and cities still remained polluted. So I want to inspire you to get involved in the ECSA Policy Working Group, to make it the strongest, most influential and powerful group in ECSA, to give your time to building influence through the EU to drive rapid policy change, and to work with regulators to deliver the evidence and behaviour change that comes from implementing large-scale citizen science programmes across the EU for critical areas of policy where our society needs to change. When we set up the European Citizen Science Association, pioneers in citizen science such as Linda Davis at Imperial College London, who inspired my interest in citizen science, Dr. Jacqueline McGlade, then the CEO of the European Environment Agency, and subsequently chief scientist at the United Nations Environmental Programme, and Janusz Potocznik, the former Environment Commissioner within the EU, who launched ECSA, recognized the potential of citizen science to drive policy. They understood that if you could attract 10% of the population of Europe to engage in citizen science, not only would we build the scientific evidence base to support the policy changes we need, but you would encourage behaviour change in our people and drive the political process to overcome entrenched economic interests. Through the ECSA working group, you will also have the chance to join the global citizen science community we are establishing through the Citizen Science Global Partnership. The CSGP, as we call it, has developed with guidance and support from the United Nations Environmental Programme from the beginnings in 2015, when citizen science was not in the vocabulary of the UN, to a position today where we are invited into the heart of the organisation. This culminated in 2019 at UNEA 4, the highest environmental decision-making body on the planet, where citizen science was recognised as an unconventional data source that could make a significant contribution to the delivery of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in the Ministerial Declaration. This means that for the first time ever, every environment minister on the planet signed off a declaration that recognised the role of citizen science. So we want your input to now build on that opportunity that this declaration has given us. As we go forward, we want to put in place the infrastructure that will support the growth of global citizen science programs. It is my belief that the time has come to build on the foundational goals of the Citizen Science Global Partnership and to put in place a global convention on citizen science to be adopted as a resolution at either UNEA 5 in 2021 or UNEA 6 in 2023, to in effect take international action to put in place obligations on governments to build citizen science into the mainstream reporting obligations of the Sustainable Development Goals, and to protect the rights of citizens to gather data and undertake research in support of the UN SDGs. But above all, we need to coalesce around global citizen science programs that have the power to expand our understanding of the great issues of our time, engage our communities in finding solutions, drive behavior change, and accelerate policy shifts. I believe that this is possible and that we can engage millions of people across the planet in citizen science programs that will deliver a future for our planet. And I'm encouraged by programs such as Courier Neuzen, an air quality monitoring program in Flanders, where 5% of the population engaged in real research that has had a profound effect on the way air quality issues are being tackled in Belgium. And more recently, the King's College London COVID-19 Symptom Tracker Citizen Science Programme has drawn in over 4 million people reporting daily to take part in scientific experiments in the UK, Sweden and the USA into the COVID-19 disease. This latter programme has also crowdsourced funding of over £1 million to keep the programme running in a little over 2 weeks, not once, but twice, at a time the UK government refused to support the programme. The scale of the involvement and the quality of data being produced has forced a change in government approach to one now supporting and funding the programme with a further £2 million grant. What both these programmes illustrate is that when we bring together health and environmental research, ordinary people across the spectrum will engage in large numbers. So my final appeal to you all is to start your journey, donate your time to the ECSA Policy Working Group, and get involved in the messy business of influencing the strategic policy decisions of our time. You will be rewarded by being given the opportunity to meet the leaders of our time and to take part in some of the most influential meetings on the planet. And I leave you with one final thought. This is a slide taken of Earth as Earth Voyager left our galaxy, some 6.4 billion kilometers away from Earth. And the thought is this, that we cannot fail in this endeavor. We must not let the light go out on the only known planet with life in our universe because of our inaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin, for that very inspiring presentation. That was absolutely excellent. So without further ado now, I'd just like to note and reiterate my point about policy priorities. Again, in the feedback form, if you're inspired by Martin's speech, which I hope you were, we've only got one planet. I certainly was very inspired by it. Please put your policy priorities into the feedback form. I notice a number of people are doing that. And I notice we also have quite a number of people have signed up in the feedback form, which is wonderful. And people from many different countries, both from Europe and across the world. So thank you very much to Martin. We'll have a time for questions and answers in a few minutes. We're now going to move to a talk by Muki Haklay, who many of you will know. And it's great to see that our viewership is actually increasing rather than reducing. So obviously we're doing something right. So Muki, on that note, I hope you're going to continue with that, and very much looking forward to what you have to say about DITOS, Arhus and so on. And apologies, by the way, just in relation to what was on my slide earlier on, I inadvertently mentioned UNESCO instead of UNECE. So apologies about that. The floor is yours, Muki.
Thank you very much, Niall. I will start actually with one of the papers that Leah, a special issue, gave a forum for. And it's very special for me because we just last year finished the Doing It Together Science project, a 3-year project, and it's one of these rare occasions where actually you have a picture when the paper was born, which is something that in most cases you can't do because it came up in your paper, in your room while you were thinking or something else. The picture here is from one of the final meetings of the consortium of DITOS in Ljubljana, where Claudia and Alex, and Claudia was leading on the paper, were discussing the different links and impacts that were led by the project. And we then were sitting together and trying to make sense of it. The reason that we had to make sense of it is because the size of the DITOS project, it was a coordination and support action, which we ended up with over 700 events and over 500,000 face-to-face engagement, over 3 million interaction, and things like the Science Bus Tour in Europe. You can see more about it in the poster that Artemis Kaolatidou shared yesterday. And there was explicit focus on policy with roundtable, policy brief that were published throughout it, meetings and other events. And we even went through it in one occasion to the European Parliament and a discussion there with MEPs. So you do all these things and you're so busy with all the events that you need some time to stand back and try to think what all these mean and how can we make sense of it. But also the scale of the activity and the range of interaction give you a room and give you the opportunity to think about what do we mean by governance. And that's what Claudia led, actually. She was kind of thinking about the concept of governance, not just in the sense of laws and regulations and the way we govern a society, but also in the wider science and technology studies concept of the term, where you also think about technical codes, you think about processes, you think about social norms, you think about different groups with worldviews and ways of thinking, so what some call epistemic communities, and things like that. And by working together with her, with Alex Bertachivska, and with Christian Nold, we were all kind of figuring out that out of the project, we can talk about 4 governance modes that are happening in citizen science project. The first of them is the one that a lot of time is mentioned and is noted explicitly, which is information for policy making. That's the one where you see the source of information that is used, for example, for environmental assessment and things like that. But it also, you can think about it as object of research policy. So that's a way in which we are doing research and science communication, and it's seen as part of a spectrum of activities that will increase, for example, involvement in science or lead to certain goals in achieving a more scientific society, for example. Another one, which is interesting, is to think about the project itself, the activities that are being funded as part of way to do policy. So SWAFS as a program is trying to encourage science with and for society, and that is a policy goal. So you can think about each and every project that a lot of people in ECSA were involved, and ECSA itself is involved, as a way for the policymakers to nudge us in a direction that they want. We can actually think about the project itself as a way to, it's an instrument in advancing this knowledge. And the final one, which is very common and much more subtle and you need to pay attention to, is the social technical governance that's happening with a lot of non-policy actors. All these kind of activities in negotiating, for example, where the science bus will stop, how it will work, and so on. So that's the paper, and you can find the link to it, and I hope that you'll find it interesting. It was very interesting to work together on writing it. But now I'll talk about the first 2 things, the information for policymaker and the object of research policy. And that's with an opportunity that we have together until the end of September to contribute to the recommendation on electronic information tool within the Arhus Convention. Now, what is the Arhus Convention? If you've been around, it's been around. It started with Principle 10 in the Rio Conference in 1992. And that's the foundation of environmental democracy, which is access to information, participation in decision-making, and access to justice. And those principles that were tried to be brought into a more stronger instrument in 1992, but weren't successful, part of it because of objection of different countries, was then recasted as a European convention in 1998. It was signed in Aarhus, which is why everyone call it the Aarhus Convention, because otherwise you'll have to call it in the full name, which is the Convention on Public Access to Environmental Information, Participation in Decision-Making, and Access to Justice, which is a mouthful. Now, what is special about Aarhus is what you see on the map, which is it was signed in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And actually, it includes not just European countries, which you see clearly on the map, but a lot of near neighbors. And it's got an influence on Central Asia. And it's our opportunity to bring in awareness to citizen science to the Russian-speaking part of the world, where we're relatively lacking involvement in ECSA, and it's something that we would like to see more. So what is happening with it? In 1998, they put in recommendation on electronic information tool, and that evolved over the year, and now they are revising it. And within the information, there is actually a line that I was saying, promotion of electronic information tool, the use of citizen science, crowdsourcing, and local indigenous knowledge to support performance of public function of provision public services, etc. There is much more in the document, and we need to together go through it and work on it. But that is something that together as the policy group, we can deal with right now. So that's it, and here's an opportunity for us to be engaged with the scientific process live right now. And just like with UNEA, we're getting more and more opportunities to be part of these policy processes. And we got this fantastic instrument that will also help us increase the reach of citizen science to new places. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Muki. Excellent. And again, I have to thank you very much for finishing on time. And just to say that now we're going to give our technicians an opportunity to play a video by Anna Berti Suman. And before we do that, or while they're doing that and getting ready that on the screen, you're welcome to just proceed with that. But I just wanted to say that there's a lot of people filling in the feedback form now, particularly in relation to policy priorities. And I just want to go through some of the people who've actually registered in terms of the association. It's very heartening to see the number of people, with people from Ireland, USA, Australia, Netherlands, Austria, the UK, Denmark, Spain, Australia, UK, Germany, Sweden, France, Netherlands, Switzerland, Spain, Canada, the Netherlands, UK, Canada, EU, Portugal, USA. So we're a very globalized group, and I encourage people who haven't yet registered to please do so. We just need your name, the country you're from, and the email address really at this stage, and we'll get in contact with you in due course. And obviously, we'll address the policy priorities in the next session. But without further ado, I hope the technicians are ready to play the video by Anna Berti Suman. Can I check with you that yes, it looks like it's coming up now. So I'm going to be quiet, and apologies in advance if some of the sound quality on this is poor, but we're doing our best, you know, in this crazy COVID time that we all live in. So hopefully you can hear it, and I'm going to be very, very quiet once this video starts. So please play.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anna Berti Suman, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Tilburg Institute for Law Technology and Society, currently second at the European Commission Research Center, where I'm performing my postdoctoral research project, Citizen Sensing as a source of evidence in environmental litigation and as a tool to mediate environmental conflicts. So this afternoon, I'm sharing with you, let's say, a reflection on the law as a sort of ally, so as a tool on the side of interested citizen science community, but also as a possible enemy. So I will show you why there may be an essential dilemma in the role that the law and the legal system could play in this debate. So let me say first that actually the law here is intended in a broad sense. So not only regulation, legal provision, but also norms containing rights, such as the human rights to a healthy environment and the right to health. Of course, the law also contains provisions that citizen science community have to respect, such as the European GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation that entered in force in 2018. So with that, I would like to start sharing my screen to show you how this dilemma can be applied in a practical scenario. So in this image, you see a sort of iconic initiative, the Cochrane Crowd. So in the Cochrane Crowd, people are asked to join this community and contribute through health evidence, so providing their own health and medical data that could inform a wide community all over the world. So of course, this seems remarkable and fascinating. There is a whole new knowledge coming from the grassroots, coming from lay citizens. However, with my colleagues and co-author Robin Pierce, Dr. Pierce, we explored to what extent these initiatives actually don't risk to hide beneath a sort of participatory propaganda, sort of subtle risks. And I can show which kind of risk can be hidden under this type of initiatives. For example, market actors may actually manipulate the crowd and try to access health and medical data. So of course, an initiative like that deserves to be heard, for example, by policymakers. However, there are also risks that the law should take into account in promoting or hindering this kind of initiatives. So why the law could be so important in the interface between citizen scientists and policymakers? So first, the law can be indeed analyzed in the sense that citizens can use the law on their side. For example, laws regarding participation, the Arhus Convention on access to environmental information. So we have a right to access environmental information, but also, for example, right to health. An initiative such as the Cochrane Crowd is actually promoting people's right to a better health that is channeled also through research. But on the other side, in the interface with policymakers, citizen scientists should be law prepared. So let's say proved that they should be able to demonstrate that their initiative is actually compliant with the law. And this can be very easy for big projects such as the Cochrane Crowd. But for smaller projects that actually do collect personal data and in certain cases also sensitive data, this can be way more difficult. But of course, policymakers could use the weapon of the law to discard potential promising projects just because they don't look compliant with, for example, general GDPR. Now, of course, citizen scientists can be wise and use the law on their side, and how to do so. So, of course, first of all, it's really important that citizen scientists know which kind of legal provision are applicable to their project, and also which kind of legal provision they can use on their behalf. So, for example, in a case of a citizen science initiative using processing medical and health data, in this case, we're maybe talking about sensitive data. So in that case, the initiative should stick to the GDPR and also adapt the GDPR to the special health citizen science case. And in our article with my co-author, Dr. Pierce, we explored exactly how the GDPR could be readapted to reflect the needs of citizen scientists. On the other side, citizen scientists could use the law on their side, promoting the right to a healthy environment, the right to health, and also using the law to show compliance with these norms. and compliance, for example, with data quality standards and data processing standards. So with that, I would like to invite more discussion, both in the academic arena and in practice, on how the law can be used, both as an enemy and as an ally for citizen scientists. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Anna, who couldn't be here in person today, unfortunately. Sorry, but there's a little note I had about volume, because obviously Anna was perhaps a bit quieter than I am, so well done to her. I'd like to invite our two physical speakers from the panelists, Muki and Martin, back, if that's possible, briefly. We have one or two questions for you both. Can you both hear me, Muki?
Yes.
And Martin?
Absolutely.
You actually have, I don't know if you've been reading the discussions there, but you actually have a hell of a lot of fans, both of you. And Martin, indeed, some people even think you should run for office. So as somebody who is a former parliamentarian myself, I wouldn't advise you to do that. It's not a good plan. I think you're doing a great job right where you are now. So I have a lot of comments, but in terms of questions, just probably one question to each, and then we'll bring back all of the panelists, because we've got quite a few policy priorities just to put to you all. So let me just get the, if I can just get down to the right place in my own form. Yeah, so for yourself, Muki, a couple of questions quickly, and maybe if you could answer them all together. What are the next steps in terms of contributing to the Arhus Convention? And a second question is for speakers who've conducted citizen science in the global south, like yourself, Muki, and I assume that that's correct, that you have indeed done that. What has been your experience with policymakers in these areas? So how does citizen science do governance? So if you can make, if you'd just like to give a general reply to those questions, I'd be very grateful.
Okay, so first of all, for the Arhus, actually, what we need to do by the end of the month is actually really small. It is comments on the documents, changing some words and maybe putting some comments. So there will be organized a meeting probably next week sometime to discuss it, and then reaching out to other people if they want to join to that one. As for the working in the global south, that's actually something that it's kind of following the principles of Sheila Jasmine about the knowing about humility and knowing how much you don't know. And we always work with intermediaries, and it's in all the cases that I've been involved. I've been involved in things also through project in development studies in urban areas, or in the type of work that our group has done with indigenous communities. And in all these cases, it's a lot of careful negotiation with local people. But that's surprisingly also the rule in the global north. So when we work with different communities around London, I always trust the political judgment of the local activists and not trying to enforce on them. So for example, they never picked up the term environmental justice, even though I mentioned it several times. And my conclusion was they realize that politically it's not useful for them, so they don't pick it up. So you try all the time to remember that the local people and their networks are way better than whatever you think you are.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you very much indeed for that. And a quick question to Martin. You mentioned in your talk about the availability of high quality data. And the question is, how do we increase the availability of high quality data for use in citizen science? And it's probably a bit of an unfair question, but nevertheless, and particularly in an EU context, asking somebody who's just leaving the EU, it's probably a bit unfair as well.
Well, let me also give you a little a thought on the global south before I come on to the data question. One of the things the Citizen Science Global Partnership has been trying to do is to encourage associations to form in the global south. So we have a registered citizen science association now for Africa. We have the beginnings of one in Asia. We have a grouping of citizen science communities for South America. And then we have an activity center on citizen science in the South Pacific. And the South Pacific one I think is really interesting because these are very small nations who are struggling with the SDGs, and they've actually come together under government direction. And that government direction has been helping them to deliver the SDGs through citizen science. And there's a mutual opportunity between the governments who can't do this any other way and the citizens who are getting direct benefit from contributing to these government programs. And a couple of examples that were given to us when we talked to the Pacific community with a whole issue around fisheries management, where the indigenous knowledge is tremendous in helping on fisheries management. And another one was on emergency response planning, where there's a lot of scientific work that can be done with the indigenous communities who are living on atolls, many cases no more than 2 meters above sea level, where the problems of sea level rise and storm issues are life and death. So there's some good examples there. When we come to data, there's a huge amount of work now going on at the UN in how you bring together and aggregate data, and a number of working groups between ECSA and CSA, and contributions and input to UNEP, who have basically systems to aggregate data together on the SDGs from formal national statistical offices. And the problem has always been, how do you get citizen science data to feed into those systems in a structured way so that the data is valued and used? And I don't pretend we've got all the answers to this yet, but the journey has started on how we can do this. And one of the ideas is that when you start to write the methodologies for the aggregation of data from the national statistical offices and the methods that are going to be used, you also look for opportunities to do that for citizen science. And it's considered to be an unconventional data source by the World Data Forum. But that process has again started. And really exciting is to see how you link the unconventional data source from remote sensing with citizen science. And there are some spectacular projects, one of which I'm well aware of coming from Australia, that is bringing together both citizen science and remote sensing to produce spectacular volumes of data that could be produced anywhere in the world to help some of the countries in the global south answer some of the SDG questions that they could not possibly do in that level of detail in any other way. So I guess the answer is join the working group, start to understand some of the issues that are around the whole business of data aggregation, and take part in the debate, because we will frame this global debate for citizen science.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Martin. I'd like to invite back all of the speakers if that's possible. And while that's going on, what I'd like to do is just read you out some of the feedback we've got in terms of policy priorities from the people who are watching and so on our feedback sheet. And please, everybody keep adding to this. Just the policy priorities, and I'd like the speakers to come in and make comments on it. I'll try and be democratic and give you all a bit of a say in that regard. We have to finish religiously, I'm told, on the hour, which is 3 o'clock Irish time. It's 4 o'clock Central European time, and the rest of you can work it out for yourselves in terms of Australia and the United States and so on. Okay, I'll just read out quickly. EU policy in citizen science and air quality is one priority. Strengthening participatory approaches in EU research, integrating that with Horizon Europe, particularly in food, agriculture and environmental research funding. Enabling and facilitating input of citizen science data to EU habitats and Water Framework Directive reporting. Long-term EU funding, and I'm sure Sven will be delighted to hear about that, and so will many others, of citizen science monitoring projects to secure strong baseline data sets and data sets with long temporal scales, i.e. funded beyond the 3-year cycle for most EU funding. We have a lot of data comments actually. Greater availability of high quality data to be made openly available to citizens and policymakers. Standardization of citizen science data quality requirements, e.g. validation protocols across EU data, citizen science data sets. Use of citizen and community science by activist organizations advocating for environmental justice. Build trust and long-term relation between elected officials and citizen science representatives and project leaders. And finally, policy is needed to implement the goals of the United Nations SDGs for 2030. So what I'd like to do is give everybody an opportunity to give their final thoughts and their comments, particularly on those policy priorities. And I'd like the audience, please, to continue to register with the organization and to continue to comment and continue to put in the, write in the policy priorities there, because those are hugely important, and that's the outcome of the workshop. So I suppose we'll start with the speakers from the previous panel. Sven, if I might go to you first, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Thanks a lot. No, it's really nice to see and impressive to see this long list of potential policy priorities. And for me, it's interesting to actually see the amount of semantic data collection and really standards for data, which is very, very interesting. And I think there may be actually a very good opportunity to also benefit from some of the work that was already done. So there I really see a very nice topic shaping up, where we may also think more about the scalability of solutions, because Martin can talk a lot about it, I'm sure, with the experience from mosquito monitoring, where actually there is this debate of having one unique approach all over the place, or offering a portfolio of approaches that fit into different contexts and different community needs. And I think this is an extremely exciting topic we couldn't touch now, but it could be also a good topic in this working group.
Okay,
just as an immediate reaction.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for being brief. And I'd ask all the other speakers to be brief enough, because we've only got about 7 minutes to go. So Leah, I'd invite you next if you'd like to say a few words, and if not, that's fine.
Just briefly, I was very inspired by the talks of the other panelists. And again, thank you to ECSA and the conference organizers. While what Martin has shared and the work we did in DC, I think is fantastic. I think we need to understand it's taken years to achieve that. And we were able to achieve that because some of us have deep ties, connections to the policy community. I would encourage folks in the citizen science community to begin to build those linkages, to build that trust relationship with policymakers, just as they're doing it with local communities, and to establish a long-term relationship such that policymakers look to you as experts, and that you can not only inform them of the work you're doing, but then be there as a technical resource for some of the priorities that they have, and you can sustain that input and influence over the long haul.
Brilliant, brilliant, and thank you very much indeed for that. Alice, would you like to say a few words?
Yep, I sure would. Yes, thanks to the other speakers. There's a lot to think about in this session, and my brain's certainly whirling. I think in response to the list of suggestions, one of the things that interests me is the policy priorities for different regions, and how in different regions some policy may overlap. There might be, some convergence in the priorities in different regions, and we can see, there are certainly things that affect all of us, but also a piece after this fantastic work by ECSA to see where policy priorities differ in different regions, and to explore why that might be, and why citizen science might be more effectual in some areas, in certain regions, and less so in others.
Okay, I tell you what, I'm marveled at the brevity and conciseness of all our speakers, because I've been at many a conference where that's almost impossible. You get one or two people who you can't stop talking, and this hasn't been the case here. Everybody's been very concise and brief, so thank you very much for that, Alice, and everybody else. Martin, what about yourself? Do you have any comments or thoughts on the policy on the various policy priorities which have been outlined.
The big issue for me is that we see examples time and time again where citizen science projects are put together. They develop absolutely excellence in what they're doing. They have regional significance, but they're funded at the local level, and it's extremely difficult to find ways to grow those projects in scalability. But what I think is beginning to emerge is that when you have a topic that not only impacts on the environmental side, but can be taken across to impact on human health, it simply takes off. And the two examples I gave you are really good examples of that. Everything they're doing in the project in Belgium could be done in Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan. It could be done in Ulaanbaatar in Outer Mongolia. But at the moment, we don't have a business model that helps us to project out and to scale up those type of activities, which are probably funded by their national governments. And we need to find a way to break that problem, because the only way we're going to get really strong change processes working is by getting large numbers of people involved in citizen science, because otherwise there are always reasons to slow down the change process. So perhaps that's where I ought to stop at this point, but bringing together environment and health and looking at the two together, for me, is a crucial area for the future.
Okay. I think you'll see from the comments, Martin, that you've been invited to take part in all sorts of things. So there should be great opportunities in the future to participate in those. And our final panelist is Muki. We're running out of time, but there's a good bit of time yet, Muki. So please fire away.
So a few final words. Notice that throughout this session, we kind of raising two things that are happening at the same time in the space of citizen science, both bottom up and top down. So kind of joining in processes like what Martin is doing and Arhus and other things allow us to join from the top down. And that's something that will be also discussed in the citizen science and SDG conference next month, which you should all follow if you're interested in policy. But also there is a lot of bottom up. So the actual activity of creating the association or involving in the global partnership, as Martin is doing and others, is actually the way that as members of the community, we are creating activism that leads to policy changes. And while it might not feel that comfortable for, say, people that are used to community work at the bottom, those things can have far-reaching impact, and we need diversity at these people that are working at the top part of influencing the top down. Otherwise, we don't get enough diversity and inclusion and, of course, the empowerment. It's scary. It's always scary to stand up in a UN event. It doesn't matter how much experience you have, and we hope that people will join and do that together.
Okay, thank you very much, Muki, indeed. We have less than 1 minute to go, so I'm not going to get into any more detail, because I want to invite everybody to go to the social channel, and we can continue this conversation in a minute. But first of all, I'd just like to say thanks to all our speakers. Sven Schade, we had Leah Shanley from the United States, we had Alice from Australia, Martin, thank you very much indeed. Muki, thank you. We also had Anna Berti Suman on the video, and I'd also like to give an honourable mention to Alison Parker, who has been our sort of champion in the background and has been hugely instrumental in helping us to get this very successful policy workshop together. And I'd like to thank, obviously, all the technicians who've made this possible, and obviously all the people who attended. So thank you very much. I think that's bang on time. And from myself, Niall Brolcháin, and everybody involved, thank you for a very, very successful workshop on policy.
Thank you.